So I'm now going to introduce you to Ailsa. Ailsa, how's it going?
Hi, James. Okay, thank you. Hello.
Good. How have you been finding the lockdown?
Well, it's quite an adjustment, getting used to completely working from home, and I'm not the most technologically savvy person, so I'm having to get used to a lot of new platforms and I guess a whole digital world, but yeah, generally getting there.
Great. Yeah, great. And how's it been affecting your work?
Well, a lot of my work is teaching, and so having to do all of that online, and yeah, managing everything, relationships with students and colleagues at a distance, and then any research I'm doing obviously is having to not happen face to face, so having to change things and think, can we use online methods to do this? Can we do it through the internet, or do we just have to take a break and wait until things change again?
Great. Well, I think we've now got some people online, so I'll officially introduce you. So this is Ailsa Russell. Ailsa Russell is a reader in clinical psychology at the University of Bath. She carries out research into how we can best adapt NHS psychological therapies for autistic adults. In this webinar, we'll be looking at providing practical tips for those supporting autistic adults during the lockdown. This webinar is particularly aimed at those with less experience of supporting autistic people and trying to learn how to do this in the context of the remote methods that we have available. So hopefully friends and family of autistic adults would find this webinar useful. So Ailsa will start by just getting you to share some of your slides. Now I've got a few questions which I think you're going to be able to address in your presentation.
Okay, so I think I can't share my screen while you're okay, great.
There we go.
Okay. So, James, will I just get going with some of this information then? And really, we were wondering how you can best support an autistic person during the lockdown. So these are really my ideas, I guess. And I think what would be really nice is to other people probably have much better, really good ideas that they can add to this, and we can kind of co-produce a bit of information. But I guess much depends on your relationship with the person. So when I was putting this together, I was really thinking about how maybe people who are volunteers or support workers who haven't got a lot of experience of supporting autistic people, but might be now trying to do that, what they might need to know. So less, I guess, around parents and children and people who in a family relationship where maybe they already have a really good idea about what their person needs. But also maybe a little bit of this is also helpful to how people can support themselves and also how they can guide new people who are going to try and support them. So it depends on your relationship. And if you're new to the person and new to autism, some things you might want to consider are, well, what kind of support can you offer and are you planning to offer? And what kind of relationship are you trying to set up? And really, most importantly, how are you going to kind of make sure you've got good accessible communication? So I think one of the most important things is at the beginning stages really is finding out from someone how they most prefer to be communicated and contacted. And you could do that first in a quite low-key way by sending an email and just saying, get back to me, but how I can offer you, a video call, I can offer text messages, I can offer email, I can offer telephone calls. What would you prefer? And how often would you like that? And when? Because I think often my experience of working with autistic adults is they really don't want sort of unprompted phone calls out of the blue, and they quite like to know when someone's going to get in touch with them, kind of what time. And they also like to have a little bit of say in that so that it isn't perhaps interrupting other things that they might be doing, and they can make space for that contact. So finding out how someone likes to be contacted, and really being clear about what it is you're getting in touch about and what kind of support you can offer and you'd like to offer. If that's practical support, so with shopping or getting medications, or if it's more emotional and kind of social support. So really just offering a person to be there to talk to. So just being clear so it's not confusing and somebody understands, what you're planning to offer and what you can do. And then making sure that you and this person have a really, you can kind of develop a way of communicating together, which you both makes sense to both of you. So you can solve problems together, and the autistic person can really feel they can be open and understood, and they can explain what it is they're struggling with and what they'd like to help with. So if you don't know someone at all, obviously you've got to get to know them a little bit so they can feel comfortable and talk to you. And instead of sort of wading in and finding out what people are very worried about or what about problems, it's quite nice at the beginning just to get to know someone a little and explain that. And sometimes the easiest way is to do that by talking about something the person's really interested in or they enjoy doing, because they might find it easier to talk about that. And you get a good sense of how they like to talk about things, and it helps you to tune in a bit and also helps you to learn a little bit more about their interests and preferred routines. And that's quite important, that kind of tuning in and just working out how we're going to communicate together, especially if you are really meeting at a distance in terms of on a video platform or on the telephone. It's quite hard to get to know someone in the usual way. So letting someone talk about something they enjoy and they're interested in gets things going nicely. And then you might want to find out how things are for them at the moment. For some people, things might be going quite well and they might be enjoying new things and they might like to talk about that. But for other people, things might be very difficult. Everyone's in very different circumstances. And I guess some of those difficulties might be new, and they might be new worries and concerns. So it might be worth finding out if these are things that are long-standing and difficult, or if these are things that are new and part of the situation that they might want a bit of extra support with. So some important things around communicating, and I think this is always good to let those people who are supporting you know, is trying not to use kind of quite open or vague questions. So just general questions like, how are you? It's quite hard to answer that. And sometimes people like things that are a bit more specific. Are you well is a really clear question, and someone can say I'm fine or not fine. Are you well today is even more specific, so how are you today? So really trying to make sure that your questions are got some specificity to them and they're quite clear, and not asking kind of multi-part negative or indirect questions, so not trying to beat around the bush really. And although I did say it's a good idea to talk to someone generally at the start about things they're interested in, it should be something they're interested in and maybe not too much small talk. So making it very clear the purpose about talking about interests is that it's a way of getting to know you, whereas, kind of 5 minutes chatting about the weather in general might seem a bit confusing and it doesn't really have a purpose, and a lot of people don't really find that very accessible or very easy. So cutting out the small talk and being prepared that you might just have a much more direct conversation. And if you do want to find out how things are going for somebody, then using quite closed questions and maybe even offering people forced choices. So, if you want to find out what their experience of getting food is like at the moment, it's that, are you finding, what's the supermarket like? Can you get there? When you do get there, do you find you can get what you need or you can't get what you need? So giving people options to answer, and you'll find out a bit more about how things are for them. And always a good idea to check in and summarize and make sure that you understand what the person's telling you and what they mean by it. And very importantly is in this kind of communication is giving people plenty of time to process what you're saying. So don't be too worried if there's a bit of a delay after you've asked a question or you've said something. It may well be that the autistic person is just taking time to make sense of what you've said and to think about what their answer is going to be. So not rushing in on those little gaps in communication and allowing a bit of time for people to get used to it. And as I said, it is about having shared communication so that if you are offering someone support, they have a nice platform for where they can communicate to you about what's the problem so that you can really tailor the support effectively. So one thing we know about autism is that sometimes people have different ways of saying things. They might not use the standard kind of terms for their emotions or for feelings or for different situations. So if somebody's using words that you're not familiar with for that, you know, unusual use of terms, check out with them that, you know, you understand what they mean, and then carry on using that language as much as you can, because although it might not be a term you use, it's really important that you kind of use the language the individual is used to using and is meaningful to them. It's a good idea as well to check out if things are people really clear do's and don'ts. So sometimes people don't appreciate jokes or use of humor. And you know, it's good to know if you're a person who's very jovial and makes a lot of jokes, you can check out with someone and say, look, I tend to use a lot of humor in my communication. Will that be okay with you? And usually people are very good at saying, yeah, that's great. And sometimes they really enjoy humor and will really appreciate that. And you can have a good kind of engagement in that way. But for sometimes people don't like it, and it's a good idea to make sure then that you don't litter your conversation with these kinds of jokes or euphemisms that might work well in some social situations, but other people might find quite off-putting. Really important is not to assume anything. You know, everybody's very different and unique, and they may be finding this situation hard, they may not be, they may be finding things that you're surprised by more difficult. So don't make any assumptions, I guess, that are based on yours or others' experience as to what might be a problem for an autistic person in the current situation. And don't be afraid to ask direct questions about how's this going? Am I offering you the right kind of support? Is my communication easy for you? Is this working well for you?
Great, that's great. Thank you very much. So it's really good. And so I think it's really, it seems to me, it's about building a healthy basis for interaction and ensuring that you understand people's preferences and interests, which is really some key take-home points there. But I think one thing that you pointed to there was the fact that people will have a range of different experiences. So, you know, for those people that are having a difficult time, how can you spot the signs that someone is struggling and help them to open up?
That's a really good point, James. And here's what I tried to think about this a bit earlier. And I guess, you know, it would be good if people feel able to tell you that they're struggling, but perhaps if they're not really communicating it, you know, some clues might be if people are less communicative than they usually are, so they seem more withdrawn. If their communication is very negative, so even if they're talking about something that they usually enjoy, but they're really not positive about it, and it's quite hard when they're talking about that for them to even cheer up, then that's a kind of an indicator that actually they're not enjoying the things they usually do. Somebody might actually find it hard to talk at all. They might be quite agitated, getting very cross maybe. They might be very tearful. So those are very obvious signs that someone's struggling. Sometimes if people are very anxious, they might find it hard to express themselves, so that even though they're talking a lot and they're not withdrawn, it might be quite difficult to make sense of what they're talking about because they're kind of jumping around from a lot of different topics, and they're really not very settled. They're quite restless in their communication. They might be really just focused on problems and not able to think outside of that, and really the anxiety is kind of tunneling their vision. So those are just signs that when you're talking with someone, if these things are kind of coming up, that people may be struggling. And then of course there's really clear risk indicators. If you know, if someone says they're struggling, like they don't want to go on, they can't go on, they're finding things difficult, they're drinking a lot, they're using drugs more, you know, they're not sleeping, then that would really tell you all was not well. I was thinking what's helpful for people if they're not doing well, and what you might advise or what you might think about. And I think what's really important is what expectations we all have of ourselves at the moment. So if you are supporting somebody and they seem to be really struggling and they say, I'm not coping, it's like, well, let's think, you know, realistically, what should it be like for you at the moment? And sometimes people set themselves these really big goals. I'll be learning Spanish while I'm in lockdown, and actually it's really hard to concentrate. It's really hard to get on with things. So making sure we're being kind to ourselves and that we're not expecting too much of ourselves at the moment. So I know, for example, my work productivity is really not like it usually would be. And I've just had to accept I'm not working at the pace I normally would, and that's got to be okay. Really important that we all pay attention to our physical needs, our well-being, healthy habits. You can get lots of good information on NHS websites about healthy habits and the 5 ways to well-being. And I think when people are very emotionally fraught, they sometimes forget all those bases, like healthy diet, a bit of exercise, not drinking too much coffee or alcohol, you know, doing some relaxing things. So if you are supporting someone and they seem not to be coping very well, checking in that they are paying attention to those things and those things are in place. Routine is really important. It's a very strange time, and all our routines have been disrupted, and it's probably quite helpful to put in place a new routine that has got those elements of some work, some rest, and some play. So, you know, depending on how you usually, what kind of routine you usually have and how you like to spend your time, checking in with the person that they are putting in place some of those elements and that their day is not too unscheduled or not too full of things. If they're used to using a visual planner or a visual timetable, great, let's get a new one going with these new elements in it and think about how the day can look. And really trying to keep mood as positive as possible. And hopefully you've noticed I put on the top of this slide staying content. And I think that's what we should be expecting, not that we'll all be gloriously happy or really cheerful, but that actually we can just try and keep reasonably content if we can. And it might be that we can't do that all the time, but that we can have some moments where we feel more positive. And if we can try and notice those times when we are feeling a little bit more positive, our mood just lifts a little bit, try and notice what you're doing in that time. Get the person, encourage the person to think about what they were doing. So maybe they can do a little bit more of that and really enjoy those small moments where they can feel a bit more content more fully. I think what's really good to talk to people about is what's missing at the moment if they're struggling. So what is it that they usually do that keeps them going? And is that particular kinds of social contact? Is it particular kinds of mental stimulation, leisure activities, preferred routines? And it might be that they can't do those things at the moment. I mean, if you've got an interest which really involves being out traveling on transport or going to a kind of very sociable group or pubs and clubs, then that's just not feasible at present. But actually, can we adapt some of those interests to meet your needs in the current situation? So problem solving with the person about whether they can find other ways of having the kinds of social contact they like. You know, if they've got friends that they really enjoy doing board games with, there's all these really amazing online platforms. Like I've discovered you can play Scrabble with your friends, and that if you've got people that you really enjoy doing that with, and you don't really want to spend time with them talking online, you'd much prefer to be doing those kinds of games with them, then seeing if it's possible to set those up. And I think if you're supporting someone, maybe you can really help them problem solve and help them find out how they can do those things and put those concrete and specific plans in place. And if they are going to try and move some of their preferred activities into the new environment, do they need any support from you to make those adaptations? Like maybe it's going to involve making a call to someone to find out, can we set this up together? And maybe they would welcome a bit of help with making the phone call or initiating the contact. The other thing, and I guess I've been talking a bit there about mood and staying kind of content and keeping ourselves buoyant, but the other thing is people might need a bit of help or support in staying calm. So anxiety might be an issue, and really important to maybe check in, is this related to the current situation? And if it is, obviously it's helpful for people to talk about that, but I found some really nice resources online. So one of my colleagues, Joe Daniels at Bath, actually did a really nice piece early on for a publication called A Conversation about if you're very anxious about coronavirus, how to stop anxiety spiraling out of control. And I think it's a really nice, helpful, digestible piece. So I've posted the link here. And the National Autistic Society also have some really nice guidance around, you know, practical, sensible things you can do at the moment if you're feeling anxious. And a lot of that is about the amount of checking you do of the news and your kind of, I guess, how much of your time is taken up with this kind of worrying information. If it's not really to do with the current situation, but someone is anxious and they've had a problem with anxiety for quite a while, it's worth checking out now in what way is it worse? And is there something about the current situation that is making things more difficult? So maybe people's strategies for staying calm have been, you know, walking or going to a mindfulness group and they can't do that anymore. And it's really helping thinking together, how can we help you use those well-rehearsed strategies that are helpful for you? How can we get those in place for you at the moment? And again, making those kind of really clear and specific plans with people where they can kind of implement them and use those strategies that help them. There's also another thing that I think people who are supporting autistic people might really want to think about doing. And one thing I think that I've heard is that some people might be worried about things going back to normal. And that although things are difficult at the moment, actually, maybe there's something about the present situation that's been actually relieved some pressure and some stress. So, you know, young people going to school, for example, might have been finding school very stressful, and now they don't have to do that anymore. Or if going into a really kind of anxiety-provoking workplace with lots of social interactions been quite difficult, it might be quite a relief just to be able to work at home and not have to go into an office or into a very busy environment. The supermarket is quieter at the moment, it's much nicer. And so actually what people might be worried about is, oh, how am I going to get back into those daily challenges when things go back to normal? So I think it's really helpful for people, if they're worried about that, to help them stay prepared. And is there anything you as a support person can do to help them stay practiced? So if they're avoiding kind of any contact with people, say even using video platforms, are you a good person for them to get used to doing that with, so they can kind of be challenging themselves a bit, even though the social world has really kind of disappeared for them in many other ways. So I think, you know, that's also something that might be something people might be more worried about, what's it going to be like at the end of this.
Great. No, thank you. That's really useful. And so I guess to summarize there, it's about knowing what your normal is and how you're differing from that, having some realistic expectations and thinking about how you can build in habits and think of new sort of innovative ways to adapt some of the things that you used to enjoy, but also preparing for some of the anxieties which are going to be involved with how things change over time. So if you do see that someone is struggling, do you have any further advice in terms of how you would support or advise someone on that basis?
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing sometimes that we underestimate is you know, obviously it's really important to find out what it is that somebody's struggling with before you kind of leap in and think what's the solution. Sometimes practical issues are really very stressful for people, and it might be that if it is a practical issue that's really causing the anxiety and concerns, there might be some practical things you can help with. So finding out what the problem is, it might be, you know, there are things at the moment like, you know, if you've got a leaking tap, can you get someone to repair it? Probably not, but what else can you do so that the noise from the leaking tap isn't running, irritating you all night and keeping you awake? And are there any potential solutions that you can kind of help the person think about, and you can think together about what's the best solution and how can we put that in place? So quite practical problem solving. But I guess if it's more a struggle with mental health and emotional well-being, as I said, really checking in with people and encouraging them to pay attention to their basic needs, that they're not staying up all night doing things that are, you know, maybe on a video game all night, which is really interrupting with their sleep. If you're not sleeping well, we know you won't feel mentally well. So if you're not having a kind of reasonably sensible, healthy diet, it's going to impact on you. So just trying to encourage people to look after themselves in healthy ways, to try and do as much relaxation activities as they can, to remain connected to people because that's really important for them, and to get support from their peers. And that's why people can really support each other with that as well. If it feels like people are paying attention to their needs and that they're still really struggling with their mental health and emotional well-being, you know, really, I guess what we would call psychological first aid. Assessing somebody in the sense of really listening to what the problem might be, listening to how they're feeling, giving them that sort of non-judgmental kind of really important listening space so that they feel listened to. Have they talked to anyone else about how they're feeling? It might be that you're not the only person and that they are plugged into some other support networks, or they could use other support networks if you encourage them. And you know, if somebody really needs encouragement to get professional help, helping them access that really. I'm a clinical psychologist, so I'll probably know a bit more about how people would access psychological therapy services through their GP. So lots of those services are operating online, and they can offer appointments online and you can self-refer. But as a support worker, knowing, having the information about what's available in your local area or environment, knowing how to contact the Samaritans, knowing how to contact a mental health crisis team if that's what's needed, and encouraging the person to access their general practitioner, their GP, if they need to. So I think those would be the kind of first base things, really. And I guess the other thing is the supporter looking after themselves. If you are doing your best for people, you may find that's what, you're worried about them, you're kind of drained. It is much harder to be working from home. So just as supporters, that having expectations of yourself as well, that it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to be finding work difficult. What can you realistically do in terms of your support role at the moment, and making sure that your manager or your colleagues are kind of aware and up to speed with that. For all of us, I think I'll keep saying this thing about self-care, because I think it's really important. Taking breaks from work as well, and making sure you're not doing back-to-back kind of quite draining support work if that's what your job is set up like, or your role, and that you also getting enough emotional support. And again, the kinds of things I was saying that are helpful for other people are also very helpful for yourself. So really keeping your mood positive, getting breaks if you're a family and you're a parent of an autistic child, and everything's in the home at the moment, you're being teacher, you're being mum, you're actually trying to make sure that you can have some breaks. Maybe you used to rely on school as being a bit of a break, and you don't have that at the moment as a break from kind of parenting and caring. So is there someone else you can kind of call in remotely who can provide a bit of time with the young person on a virtual platform and keep them occupied while you really do go and take a break if you can? So really trying to be creative, I guess, and pay attention to your own needs.
Great. Great, thank you very much. And so that's really, really useful, and some really good advice about how you can support someone else in terms of understanding their basic needs, but also in terms of how you can support yourself, and some really nice structure there. So if anyone, thank you very much, Ailsa. That was a really fantastic presentation. I would just, if anyone has any questions, if you can submit those. And Ailsa, if you can stop sharing your screen. Perfect.
Yeah. That's
great. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, if they can just post them on Facebook underneath the webinar, we'll get to those as soon as we can, and we'll try to address some questions that we already have submitted from the beginning. So we have one question here, which has definitely been a big theme that we've heard from autistic people and their carers, is one around uncertainty. So, this idea that people are trying to desperately search for uncertainty, but there's a sense that everyone feels that they're in the same boat. But how do we explain to people, how do we support people to understand that uncertainty, both in terms of the autistic person, but also in terms of helping autistic people to explain how the uncertainty feels to other people, because obviously it's something which autistic people can feel quite acutely.
Do you want me to say what? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think it's really hard at the moment because so much is uncertain. And you mean I think there's two things in that question. One is, how do we explain to other people what uncertainty feels like? Yeah, and I guess I mean, I don't really know how to explain that. I think trying to have an open conversation with someone and saying, like, it's really difficult for me when I don't know what's going to happen, because part of it is I might imagine the worst thing's going to happen, and it's just not knowing. I think in terms of dealing with the uncertainty, people have they've had to live with this kind of difficulty, and they've probably got really good strategies. I mean, at the moment, I think what's really important is really trying to just as much as possible put some time in the moment and not dilute any positive times. So if you do notice that you're doing something that you quite enjoy, that can be not destroyed, but it can be spoiled a bit if you've got lots of worries and that kind of uncertainty and concerns more generally going on through your head. So just trying to give yourself a little bit of time in the day or an hour where you can put aside the uncertainty and just, I'm just going to enjoy this one thing for 5 minutes. I'm going to schedule, not worrying or not paying attention to uncertainty. I'm going to schedule just really living in this nice moment, doing this thing I enjoy, really looking at it, having a very multi-sensory experience with it, even if it's just for a short time. So I guess if you can schedule worrying, that can be helpful for people so that they can enjoy the times where they can schedule not worrying, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds very useful, and it definitely chimes with some of the advice that we've also heard from Jackie Rogers as well, is about giving some time for the anxiety, but not allowing it, and the uncertainty, but not allowing it to overtake things. And so if you go to our information hub, you'll also find some more information there, when hopefully that can be quite useful. So we've got a question here around how people cope with the change to phone video calls with the NHS, and how autistic people can be supported to set this up, but also how we can respond to their needs and what people's options are in that respect. I don't know if you have anything to advise on that.
No, I mean, I think it would be safe to say that, a lot of some clinicians, so some clinical services are very used to running things online, but for everyone, for the whole world, it's actually quite new. So I think everyone's adjusting. What I've heard from colleagues in the NHS is they find that their appointments are shorter, that there's something about the nature of online communication that, you don't need to, you can kind of get your business done quite efficiently, and it feels, appointments have to be shorter, and not always, but that is actually maybe something quite helpful to know and to expect. If you find your first contact is going to be really difficult, then it's a good idea to send an email and let people know, I want to get in touch with you. I'd like to use this service, but I find it really stressful using online platforms. Can we start off with an email conversation or a telephone conversation? Can we do it with the camera off? Can we do it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes? So trying to think for yourself at first, and that's where your support person might help you, is what would work best for me? How could I get into this if I wanted to use a mental health service? Would it be better for me to have some emails first? Can I have that? And then can we just have appointments with the camera off? And how will that work? So what can you tolerate, really, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really useful. I think it is. It's about just tolerating different preferences, isn't it? Because different groups have different needs. We've just had a question here. I guess this really points towards the last question, which you addressed around caregivers. So obviously, like all of us, caregivers also have their moments when they feel very stressed, and it might be, and in that time it might be harder for them to adapt when to the nuances and the needs that autistic people have in terms of their difficulties. How can we recognize those difficulties and help someone when we're ourselves feeling a bit stressed?
Yeah, I think that's so important. It is really hard to, give quality care and support if you're not, if you're feeling stressed, and it's also difficult to take a time out and take a break because we're all in the one house or whatever it is. So, and so you need to pay attention to yourself and your own needs, and how can you take care of yourself? How can you have a bit of recovery time? Can you schedule a bit of recovery time? Can you negotiate a contract with the person? It very much depends on individual situations to say, this is our plan for today. I'm going to have half an hour of, this is what I'm going to be doing for this 30 minutes, and this is what you're going to do. And making sure that 30-minute break is for you very recuperative, and something that will help you de-stress, will help you relax. It might be that if everybody's very anxious, doing some kind of like relaxation or headspace or mindfulness apps together takes a bit of heat out of the situation and gives you all a bit of space and relaxing time. So I think, it's hard to be prescriptive, but I think it's about making sure that as much as possible you can take care of yourself and give yourself that time.
Yeah, I think that's really, really great advice. And I think, anyone who's a parent realizes that you sometimes just need to take some time out yourself and make sure that you're looking at things in as calm a way as possible. Well, Ailsa, thank you very much. That's been really, really fantastic and really, really useful, I think, for people who are watching online at the moment. So I just want to finish up by saying a huge thank you to you for your time in delivering such a fantastic presentation and answering those questions so thoroughly. And also just a huge thank you to everyone who's watching online and who has submitted such interesting questions. I'm sorry that we haven't managed to get through all of them yet, but I hope that you all found that useful. And if you're interested in giving us feedback, please do so in the link which we've submitted in the comments section. Thank you very much to you all again, and of course, thank you very much to you, Ailsa.
Thank you, James. Thanks.
Thank you.